There are reports of criminal activity around the world almost daily. It's more common than most people want to believe that teenagers are committing and carrying out violent crimes. Teenagers worldwide desire autonomy and the opportunity to make their own choices. The teenage years are often difficult for everyone involved, especially for parents. Today's parents are under greater pressure to provide for their children, making it more challenging than ever to shield and guide their adolescents. Envision how you would feel if the police showed up at your door, demanding the presence of your son or daughter, who is in their adolescent years. That's every parent and guardian's worst nightmare. But law enforcement and interrogators are even more precarious, as they cannot afford to visit the wrong residence. How can those conducting the interrogation be sure they have their man? It's a form of signaling that they use. Some of these signals occur unintentionally, but they are all readily apparent to a perceptive observer. Some juvenile offenders are also cunning enough to try to deceive authorities, but they are smart enough to know when to quit. We'll examine what happens when the cops finally catch up to these juvenile murderers. First and foremost, when criminals become aware that their involvement in a crime has been uncovered, they display a series of correlated behaviors. Self-pacifying behaviors include, but are not limited to, incessant head nodding, nail biting, shoulder shrugging, always the same shoulder, depending on how they're seated, and hair caressing. A guilty defendant or an accomplice may exhibit one or more of these characteristics as the interrogation develops. As the police questioned them, these outlaws became increasingly obvious. Second, the more questions you ask, the more inconsistent their story seems. When a teenage girl commits a crime and discovers she can't get away, her story of the events leading up to the crime begins to change. A good illustration of this is when they give conflicting accounts of what transpired on the day of the crime. Such discrepancies are most readily apparent in their accounts of the time immediately preceding and following the crime. At first glance, they give off an air of self-assurance and have a clear strategy on how to tell their story. Law enforcement often has them repeat their stories, which can lead to contradictions, especially when it comes to the time of day they committed a crime. A good example is someone who claims to have gone for a stroll at 5:30 p.m. on the first occasion but then changes it to 5:45 p.m. on the second. The second issue is providing a vague response to a question that requires a yes or no answer using words like probably, maybe, and to wit, did you see the victim on Sunday? In all honesty, I can't say. This response occurs when the speaker's words do not accurately reflect their intentions. Given that their claims are obviously false, they aim to persuade. As the police question them for longer, they begin using more vague language. When the police ask questions such as, "How well do you know the victim?" the answers become more obvious. They'll say, to a negligible extent, "I assume she was a neighbor. The truth is that I don't know them very well." Mostly, they avoid getting too close to their target by asking too many personal questions. Such claims typically suggest the speaker knows more about the victim than they're letting on to the authorities. The goal is to make the police believe that they are completely clueless about the victim's identity. Attempting to dodge a leading question is another common red flag. Deflecting questions that can undermine their story is a common strategy used by criminals and psychopaths. They may, for instance, change the subject when asked where they were at the time of the crime. Another tactic they use to avoid discussing private matters is to change the subject. However, the most telling clue that an adolescent knows she's been discovered is when she reveals information that is not generally known. Most of the time, she doesn't even realize she's doing it. During questioning, she says, blood dripped down the back of her head and onto her clothes. When an interrogator receives such detailed information, he immediately suspects the informant of wrongdoing. And it's safe to assume that everyone else in the questioning room feels the same way. Criminals frequently show surprise when reflecting on their own words. An expression of regret follows the typical strategy of sobbing to gain sympathy. Anyone, including young people, is urged to stop criminal activity. We hope that all criminals, no matter how young or old, be apprehended so that the world might be safer. Please show appreciation for those who have watched this far by clicking the like button and subscribing to the channel.